Balakun, a bridge to Ukraine. Join the conversation at balakun.org.
Балакун – міст в Україну. Приєднуйтесь до наших розмов на www.balakun.org.
Please subscribe.
The topic of good Russians. What's the main point about them in Europe? What's the main point about them in the whole world? So you being a journalist, talking to different people from different European, even not European, non-European countries, what's the main point about them? Why are they so popular? And what's the point of good Russians in the world?
That's a very good question. Always takes a bit of time to reply because I think it's also frustrating question because I think we already touched upon this, but I find this constant equalizing of, the Russian draft dodgers or, people who are seeking refuge, Russians seeking refuge in Europe, and Ukrainians who are surviving genocide as equal victims in what is happening. And I think this premise is the most frustrating one because at any point, not a single Russian citizen in this situation is of equal victim position in what is happening. Ukrainians are the ones who are suffering from genocide. The Ukrainian cities that are being, eradicated completely, and Ukrainians who are losing friends, family, and homes. And this is uncomparable to whatever people suffering, Russian citizens who are trying to dodge a draft or run away from taking responsibility for what is happening in their fascist country. It's a complex question why very often, once again, abroad, people take those stories equally, and why, for example, for Russians, it's much easier to secure empathy and solidarity from some Westerners or some foreigners than for Ukrainians, and why you don't have to try that much to get glorified coverage in news and get the terrific book deals if you say just one word against the war in Russia, but why it's so hard for any Ukrainian stories to get heard, even if half of your family has been murdered, or you lost your home, or you lost everything. These are very complex questions, I think, mostly addressed to foreigners, not to us. And I think critically, few people look at this, why it's so easy for them to empathize with any white Russian, much easier than it is with Ukrainians and their stories. Not saying that this is a mainstream, but it's definitely mainstream when it comes to establishment circles, media, academia, politics. Maybe once again, because all these people and their education has been heavily affected by Russian propaganda and Russian colonial gaze, and they see the Russia through the prism of the colonizers and all this glorification, romanticization of Russian culture that they were exposed to, but they've never been exposed to anything Ukrainian, and they didn't even know that the Ukrainian resistance and struggle existed up until recently. So maybe we're just, dealing with that fallout as well. But just to end quickly, I think in my work, I'm personally not concerned with Russians in my work. Despite that I focus on Russian colonialism, I never focus on Russia per se, on the metropole. My work on exposing Russian colonialism is happening 100% through amplifying the stories of those who survived Russian colonialism. I truly believe that, one survivor of Russian colonialism can tell you more about what Russia is and what it does and how it operates than millions of Russians combined. And that's why it's important to center those stories, center those non-Russian voices. And I honestly believe if there are Russians who want to change Russia, they need to be silent for now and amplify those voices as well, and not to make it all about themselves, and not to, self-victimize and pretend that they're of equal victims like anyone who's trying to survive in Ukraine or in former Russian colonies.
And there's also, I think, the very different dimensions of Russian propaganda. So the one dimension is their own state propaganda that one can see on their state televisions or satellite television throughout the world, or Russia Today, or some of a kind. And the other dimension is actually that good Russian propaganda. Like there is a bunch of good Russians, different media, like they call in themselves independent media or Russian media in exile. And they have really infiltrated all the countries throughout Europe, and not only Europe. And they are pushing this topic that they are against Putin and it's Putin war, it's not Russian war. And this propaganda, this scale of this dimension of propaganda makes people believe that they are good, they are fighting for good against evil, alongside Ukrainians, alongside the democratic world. And I guess that can be also the point why Europe and America and other countries are obsessed with good Russians.
I mean, is that really different? The Russian state propaganda and the worldview that share the self-appointed opposition media in Russian media in exile? I don't think so. And this is probably the biggest problem for all Russian neighbors who do not have any trust in these forces, just because these people cannot simply answer very simple questions like to whom Crimea belongs, or what do you think about all those crimes committed by Russia in your name before Putin? Are you ready to apologize for invasion of Georgia in 2008? You ready to apologize for committing genocide, Holodomor in Ukraine in 30s? Are you, are you ready to apologize to Circassian genocide at the late of 19th century? And all those hundreds of endless crimes against humanity committed in the name of Russia. Are you aware of it and you're ready to start conversation by acknowledging that it happened? And the majority of these people will never accept that. And in personal interactions with all these people, and I worked with many of them, thousands of Russians who are against the Putin regime. Every time you come to this question, you get massive aggressive pushback, even with people who are fervent with their opposition to Putin. They will never accept the fact that Russia in some ways is not great. And this again comes back to the start of our conversation. If the person believes that there is greatness in Russia, this is your red flag of imperialism, because there is no such thing as great and not great nations at least in my head. We're all valid, equal, we all have value. But for imperial mindset, there are great nations and then the rest. And the fact that these people cannot accept this simple premise, and they think that Russia is always great, it's just a bad timing or the bad ruler or just bad circumstances. This is a problem. And I think this is the biggest problem that we often have with our inability to find any point of any conversation with these people.
Yeah, I just want to summarize. The first thing I think that all the Westerns should debunk to themselves is debunking mysterious Russian soul. Like this, like it so much. There's no such thing as it.
I think in this case, if I'm allowed just to add, because this is maybe a bit geeky and wonky, but this is a topic of already colonialism in the West. Oftentimes, Westerners see Russia through very Oriental lenses. There is a term Orientalism by great theoretic of colonialism, Dr. Said. And he also mentioned that Westerners see anything that it's in East through these colonial gaze lenses of orientalizing the other peoples that make them more mysterious, kind of allowing to decrease their equality and human value, to present them with this kind of mystic, mysterious ways that they're, driven by emotions or very, very unexplained, almost next to animal-like. And I think in case of Russia, this is sometimes often happens. It happens in case of Ukraine as well. There is a sort of that when some Westerners see Ukraine through Oriental lenses. They paint us as these messy people who cannot get their act together. They're too emotional. They're constant troublemakers. Nothing will ever good will come out of them. They need order. And they see Russians as also through these lenses, but in positive way. Well, they're so mysterious; it's impossible to understand them. They must have like really tortured soul and some really unfortunate consequences that drove them to commit all those genocides. There is no way that they're just a byproduct of fascism. They're just very complex but unexplainable figures. But this is something that is not for us, unfortunately, to fix. This is a problem that in the West not often talked about still, and especially when it comes to Russia, Ukraine, or Eastern Europe, or Northern Asia, Central Asia, it has never been addressed.
The difference, I think, is quite startling between how people perceive Russia from the neighbors of Russia compared with the rest of the world, because there's a very different experience from those two perspectives.
I think once again, this power imbalance sometimes escapes people. The dynamic between abuser and abused, people just often don't see that because they don't know the historical context, because they maybe overproject something of their own, which sometimes happens with the Americans a lot as well. But also, I remember I've been like to this friend's house, and the person who is generally very supportive of Ukraine, and they got very riled up and emotional about the stories about Russia and the whole talks about Russian colonialism. And they said, like, I read all the time what you post and the work and the stories that you amplify, and you constantly say that genocide is Russian culture, terrorism is Russian culture, torture is Russian culture, emphasizing that this is part of the Russian culture, all these atrocities that are happening, not a happenstance. I just cannot believe that Russia is that evil. No one in the world can be that evil. And I remember this conversation, and there's a recent movie, Zone of Interest, right, about Holocaust and how people live next to concentration camp, and they literally cannot fathom, or they choose not to believe that this utter evil is happening right across the wall from them. And I feel sometimes that this is this situation is being played out in many foreign homes and many foreign heads, where people just cannot comprehend that this kind of evil can be happening for that long, for so many centuries, and nobody did anything. And then you start questioning what kind of world we're living if we're allowed to this happen, and what have I done personally to ever stop this? Because it is that horrible that if you're a decent human being, you cannot comprehend that, this is just allowed to happen. And yeah, but that's, again, it's what we can only do is to inform people, start thinking about it, and start kind of realizing what is happening. What they do next is, of course, their responsibility, whether they act.
And I think that's one of the points that no one believed that Russia was evil, is that Russia was on the bright side during the Second World War, like one of the countries that fought an axis of evil.
We had another question from the community that was a little bit more modern context. So he says, we have the example of Russia's invasion of Georgia and the fact that the government is now pro-Russian. So that's the government in Georgia. What do you see as the risks of Russian colonialism spreading in Ukraine, apart from the military? What do you propose to counteract this?
I think the biggest danger that, first of all, if we learned anything from history, that fascist empires won't stop until they stopped by force. And if the land grab, happens in this case, it will continue on, not only because of Russia, but because Russia is now closely watched by other authoritarian or fascist governments and forces all around the world. And they wait and see if this will play out for Russia, and then everybody can do that. And means that it's a fair game for any country to invade other countries, for China to invade Taiwan, for Iran to do whatever the hell they want, and for any other fascist or authoritarian regimes to just go on a rampage. We know that for a fact. It's not just speculation. We see how those countries actively help Russia to win this war, supplying all the means possible. So this is the biggest danger, that's domino effect. And also, if we know anything from Russian history, they never stop. So they only stop when they're, when they suffer military defeat, whether it was, with recent wars or any kind of recent example. I can quickly just add that even inside Ukraine, when the Russian invasion started in 2014, and a lot of our friends who were forced to abandon their homes and flee from eastern Ukraine, from Crimea, I clearly remember them coming to us who were I lived in Kyiv at that time, and they were telling us, if this is not stopped, if we don't fight back, if we just, allow this line to be official, they will come back and they will grab more, and they will come here, and this will happen here, because this is how fascism operates. They're hungry for more all the time. They need to justify their existence by expansion. This is what the nature, the DNA of any empire. The empire only lives until it expands. It starts dying quickly when it collapses, when it shrinks. But we were, many of us didn't believe in that much, and we thought, like, if we just stop the advances and, okay, give them out this, the 7% of Ukrainian territory, they will leave us at peace. Those people were right, and I personally, people like me, were wrong. So this is just extrapolate to the story for the rest of the world, and every Russian neighbor will tell you absolutely the same. This is not just Ukrainians being warmongers and hateful and revengeful. This is the story that will be repeated to you, to all those millions of people living around Russia. They will tell you absolutely the same. So please listen to those voices and amplify them, and just pay attention.
Yeah, I wanted to come up with a request of our students. As a conclusion, could you name 5 key points to talk to a person who is out of colonial context, Russian colonial context, to give this person understanding that it's just hell?
Well, give them the book first. I received some of the messages of people saying that, they now just get this book and especially in situations where they're tired of explaining or tired of arguing, they just hand this book over and they hope that it will get the effect that it's designed to get. Because first of all, this is a book that engages people on very empathetic, emotional level, because it's an art book first. And then if you feel something, then you can delve deeper into facts. So, we use this we use this instrument of Ukrainian art to get people to think. So it's a conversation starter. But I honestly, if I can really to narrow it down just to three, I would come back to the same formula that we pointed out about gaslighting, baiting, exterminating. And through many, many examples that you can bring it from anywhere, as many as you can name and as many as you can educate yourself with, just show that there is a simple formula, disregarding of regimes, disregarding of personalities, over centuries that Russia is using to violate these spaces that do not belong to them. And I think once people see that there is a pattern, this pattern of serial behavior, and it's not just about Ukraine, this is where at least those who are open-minded, who want to learn more, this is where they start to think like, okay, if the Kazakh person or a Kazakh experience Ukrainian experience, Georgian experience, Estonian experience, Czech experience, but they tell you the same story or show you the same pattern, maybe there's something more there than just a madman who is, on a mad revenge and trying to conquer Ukraine.
Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. It was a pleasure to speak with you.
Once again, super thankful for your work. Happy to amplify it in any way because it's incredibly important, and actually I truly believe that it makes an actual impact by connecting, just people to people through their experiences. This is worth a lot.
We're already seeing that. Like we had a mentor recently visit Ukraine and met up with his student in real life, and it was so cool, like just to hear those stories. And I think it's also really changing the attitudes of the mentors once they actually have a real contact, a real friend in this situation. It really changes their mind about what they're watching. So it was for me anyway.
Of course, anyone who has a Ukrainian friend, they are, rarely capable of saying and, repeating vile Russian propaganda talking points. That changes a lot. Of course.
So we need to establish a program for each Western that should be Ukrainian friend.
That's what we're doing.
Yes, that's exactly what you guys are doing.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you so much.
We'll send you a link if you don't mind sharing it. That would be wonderful.
Absolutely, 100%.
Дуже дякую, Максиме.
Дякую вам. Всього найкращого.
Okay, happy end. Do, do, do.